My name's Lucas, I'm 24, I'm a nerd, and I still live with my parents. Will I ever buy a house? That's a question I've been asking myself for quite some years now. And here in Canada where I live, the housing market is out of control. Since before COVID, housing prices have skyrocketed. In my city, we're seeing housing prices upwards of $700,000 to $900,000 for a pretty nice single-family home with 3 to 4 bedrooms, 1,500 to 2,000 square feet, and a couple bathrooms. In order to get a new townhome, you're going to be spending about the same. And to me, it's very discouraging. I've been saving money, I've been investing, and I've been trying to do everything right, but I still have a lot of doubts. I'm just wondering how other people in their 20s and 30s are feeling about the housing market today in Canada, the United States, and in other parts of the world. Because let's face it, income, wages has not risen in proportion to the housing market, right? We saw the spike in 2017 and COVID, but wages have not kept up with that inflation. So that means what? Well, it means that we're having to pay much more on our mortgages. We need much higher down payments, but our jobs aren't keeping pace. Our incomes, at least, the average or median Canadian income is not enough to support today's housing prices. Even if you do have a really high income job, let's say you're in a really good situation. You have a partner, you each make $100,000. Fantastic. Technically, you can buy a home. You save a couple $100,000, maybe put 20% down. Fantastic. But your mortgage payments, if let's say you take out a $600,000, $700,000 mortgage, they're still going to be very high, and you're going to be paying, upwards of $4,000 plus per month towards your mortgage. That's a lot of money, and that's money that could have been used to invest and to build assets. So one of the things I always think about is how people are buying houses before they get financially not stable, but in a great financial position. I think the way people should approach it nowadays is they should be they should be building their asset base first before buying that house. Because ultimately, the house is going to be a huge drain on your income. And you're going to have all these expenses that maybe you didn't even consider. Property taxes, maintenance costs. Your roof needs to be replaced. You need a new refrigerator, new oven. All these things are going to be costs that you're going to be incurring every year while you own that property. Now, there is a nuance to this. If you are able to purchase a multifamily property like a duplex or a triplex, you could potentially live in one unit and rent out the others. And this will help you offset your mortgage. The problem with this, at least where I live, is that the law is very pro-tenant, meaning if the tenant doesn't make their payments, it can be very difficult to evict them, to get them out. And so you run the risk of having people living in the property and not paying, but you can't get new renters in who will pay. So again, these are some of the things to consider. I think there are definitely options out there, but in today's economy, us young people, even people, in your 40s or 50s, if you're looking to buy a home, you've got to be a little more strategic about it these days. Well, probably a lot more strategic because the game has changed. You can't buy a house for a basket of blueberries and a song like you could in the 1950s and 60s, or even in the 80s, or even in the early 2000s when you could buy a nice house, at least where I live here in Ontario, for $150,000. It's just not the case anymore. That's a down payment at best. So the solution is what? Well, I'd like to say it's to make a lot of money, but that's easier said than done. And also, Yeah, I don't think people should be looking at housing as a solid investment these days, because ultimately you're probably not going to see that cash flow that you used to when housing costs were lower, right? Rent is obviously somewhat controlled. You can't just go charge, $3,000 for a couple of rooms in a house. So you're limited with how much rent you can be charging and how much people will be paying. And that will, ultimately impact how much cash flow you actually have from that property, and, how much of the mortgage you can actually be covering. So I just think it's an asset class that isn't quite as, valuable as it used to be. I could be wrong. Maybe it'll keep rising in price. Maybe, who knows, 10 years from now, we could be seeing housing prices in the 2 millions. I don't know how people are going to afford that. I don't know how this is going to unfold. Interest rates are very low right now. We have the tariff situation in the US that's causing a lot of economic uncertainty. So there's just a lot of uncertainty, I think, in the economy right now. People don't know what to do. People are buying houses, young people. Like I said, the dual income, no kids is very common. Support from parents, giving the kids that down payment is pretty common, I think. But just because you can buy the house doesn't mean you should. And I think that's where a lot of folks are going wrong, right? They're getting into that $800,000 house. Okay, cool. But now, again, you've got a huge mortgage on your hands. You're strapped. Even with a great income, you're paying property taxes, all these extra expenses, plus your mortgage, the interest associated. So I don't know. I think the key is to get rich first. I really do. At least to be well on your way to becoming financially independent. And that's really what I want to be talking about on this channel, is how to get yourself in a great situation, in a powerful situation, not only financially, that's a big part of it, but also how to overcome limiting beliefs, how to be healthy. This channel is really, it's going to be all about how you can level up in life, I think. And I'm really uncertain about the future. There are places you can move where housing is cheaper, but that comes with other issues, right? Maybe groceries are more expensive. Maybe healthcare isn't readily available. Maybe the weather sucks. So there's a lot of different factors to consider. And I think as we move forward in the next decade, people are going to really have to start shifting their mindsets and thinking differently about things. Otherwise, they're just going to end up getting in a ton of debt and struggling financially. They're going to have to continue working and running on that treadmill and never really getting ahead. And I don't know if people will even be able to retire if this is the strategy that they're going to be taking. So I'm really curious to hear what some of you have to say. I'd love to read your comments, so make sure you drop them down below. But yeah, I just wanted to go on a little rant about the housing market, because it's something that's kept me up at night. Not literally, but definitely something I think about on the daily. And I think my strategy is again, to be building those assets and to get into that really solid position where I can easily make payments with my investment portfolio. Is renting even a better option in the long term? I think right now, in terms of investing, getting started with a side hustle or a business that you can scale while also working is a great option for people. I think investing in low-cost index funds and increasing your savings rate. So let's say you take home $5,000 a month. If you can keep your expenses super low and just save 80% of your income, that'd be great. Obviously, unless you're living at home with your parents like me, that's probably not realistic for most people. But looking for ways to reduce your expenses, maximize your income, and really build your assets through buying index funds or some other sort of, long-term investment on a regular basis, dollar cost averaging, so that you're not putting all your money in at the peak or at the bottom. you're consistently just buy until you start to just get into a really solid position financially. And then you're able to really unlock a lot of facets of life that used to be taken for granted, like housing, like being able to support a family. Again, the game has gotten harder, but it's also there's a lot more opportunity to make money online, YouTube, copywriting, digital products, courses, selling things online, flipping, drop shipping. There's so many different opportunities available aside from the traditional 9-to-5 job that I think if you're smart and if you're willing to put in the work, and most importantly, if you're willing to fail and put yourself out there, then you can get ahead. But it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of consistency. But the bottom line here is we need to start thinking strategically about things in order to get to where we want to go in life and figure out what really matters to you, right? People just spend so much money on things that don't necessarily even add value to their life. New clothes. I barely buy clothes. Have a, pretty decent wardrobe, and I keep my clothes in the best condition that I can. Occasionally, on a birthday, I might get a nice new shirt or a pair of pants. But I think just being very conscious about where you're spending your money, not necessarily cheap, not necessarily, austere, but really thinking about where your money's going. Where are you spending your hard-earned cash? Are you buying assets or are you buying liabilities? These are things that we need to be thinking about if we want to get ahead in life, right? So I hope this video was helpful to some of you out there. Again, I'm 24, I'm living at home, and I'm thinking about homes and life and what the future is going to look like for me and for other people in the world, because we are in some interesting times. And I would love to hear your thoughts. So make sure, again, drop a comment. I'll make sure to read them and reply. I'm Lucas. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.